Time travel, always one of the most fascinating and interesting cornerstones of science fiction, popularised in 1895 in H.G. Wells' brilliant, iconic time travel novel, The Time Machine, which was the first time travel story to suggest the idea of a machine that could project people backwards and forwards in time. Science fiction as a sort of a genre has been around since the 17th century. I think there's records of Chinese works of fiction that dabbled with areas of going back in time and experiencing things from the past. But I think it was Wells' book that really popularised the idea, and as I said, it's become one of the cornerstones of science fiction, along with space exploration and alien invasions and so on. Time travel in films and television has taken all sorts of forms, and a few random examples that spring to mind, of course, is the Doctor in Doctor Who, who's always whipping about in space and time. Marty McFly in Back to the Future, Liz and Simon in the iconic children's series Time Slip from the early 70s, the two scientists in Irwin Allen's The Time Tunnel. There are hundreds of other examples that you can probably come up with yourself. One of the most fascinating and charming time travel stories, though, was produced by the BBC back in 1980 as one of their Play for Today strands, which was a series that ran on the BBC midweek, hour and a half, independent one-off films or plays, often dealing with sort of social issues and social realism, very rarely dabbling in areas of science fiction. Until 1980, when we met Dominick Hyde. We'll talk about him on the flip side. Yes, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mount. Before we talk about Dominick Hyde and his journeys around the flip side, I just want to welcome new subscribers who've come aboard the last few days. A couple of recent videos have been retro TV things, which always do well on this channel. So welcome one and all. Please stick around. Check out my back catalogue of videos. There's loads of retro stuff you're going to be interested in, plus reviews of new films, unboxings, physical media, all that sort of stuff. So please stick around. If you're new here, if you found this channel, you've stumbled across it, because Dominick Hyde rang a bell, you saw the thumbnail, whatever, please do the decent thing. Please help me out and subscribe to the channel. Press that subscribe button. We're currently thundering towards 1,750 subscribers, which is fantastic. Regular viewers will know that's far, way above and beyond what I ever expected for this channel. And I'm so pleased and so grateful to you all for subscribing. So please click that button if you're new here. I would love to get to 2,000 subscribers. That would be a very wonderful thing. And it would be great for the channel, of course. So please like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below as well. That's really important, because I like to get a community going here. And I think it's quite a nice community of people who are interested in films and TV. There's not a lot of shouting. There's not many teenagers jumping in, delivering F-bombs because they don't like Doctor Who or whatever. Get the occasional one, but they soon get deleted. So it's nice here. People can share opinions and have a chat about classic TV and modern films and things. It's a safe place on the internet. So stick around, why don't you? Press like and subscribe. My analytics show me that about 2/3 of my viewers aren't subscribers to the channel, which seems crazy to me. So just press that button and be part of my world of stuff. Thank you very much. Let's return to Dominick Hyde. Dominick Hyde, the flip side of Dominick Hyde. Let me tell you a little bit about the history of Dominick Hyde. Back in the late 1950s in Canada, a young lad called Alan Gibson was fascinated by contemporary stories and reports of UFO sightings. And he heard his parents talking about these things and theorising what they might be. But he, as an imaginative young child, came up with his own theory. He didn't believe that flying saucers were from outer space. He believed that they were from the future. Time travellers from some future era, travelling back to see what life was like in the 20th century. This idea was so vivid in his mind that he created the whole idea, and I think even the title of the flip side of Dominick Hyde, and he developed it all in his head, and that idea stayed in his head until he came to the UK many years later, trained up as an actor, decided that an actor's life wasn't for him, and went into directing. And he started directing plays, started working on television, and eventually this idea resurfaced. He pitched it to the BBC, who pounced on it and asked him to develop it as a screenplay for Play for Today. They teamed him up with another writer, a more experienced writer called Jeremy Paul. Alan Gibson had worked with him before, so they had a rapport and a relationship. And they squirreled themselves away in BBC Television Centre and thrashed out the idea fully and developed the script that would become The Flipside of Dominick Hyde, which aired on the 9th of December 1980, the day after the assassination of John Lennon in New York. And that's quite poignant because there is a sort of a Beatles reference in Dominick Hyde. So what is Dominick Hyde all about, for those of you who haven't seen it? It's a charming, whimsical science fiction romance, I think is the best way to put it. But it's full of really clever ideas. It's got a nice lining, quite gentle humour. And I think gentle is the word that sort of describes it, really. It's not an action adventure. It's not a big spectacle. There are special effects in it, which actually stand up quite well today, 40 odd years later. The story then starts off with the title sequence comes up, The Flipside of Dominick Hyde, and we see aerial views of London in 1980. We see the familiar curve of the Thames. We see various buildings. It makes you realise how the skyscape of London has changed, not for the better, since 1980. And eventually we pull back and we see that this is all being observed from inside some sort of capsule. We see some sort of digital displays. And we see a curious young man with a mop of curly hair gazing down in wonder at the scene of what's going on below. Then we cut to the year 2130 and we meet Dominick Hyde proper. He's played by Peter Firth. He's what's called a correspondent, and he is tasked with travelling back into time to observe the past and make notes about the way life was lived in the 20th century. He works for this organisation which is collating all this information for purposes that we don't really know, part of an historical record, because as it transpires later on in the film, something happened, some sort of cataclysm or apocalypse. Humanity has survived and developed in slightly different ways, and presumably records of the past have been lost. And with time travel facilities having been created at some point, travellers go to what's called the Flipside in these charming flying saucers. And this is very much a flying saucer, this sort of domed machine with a little hatch on top that people climb into. Hence the flying saucer connection that Alan Gibson made back in the 50s. In the year 2130, life is very different. It's very sterile, it's antiseptic. People stay indoors because presumably they don't think it's safe to go outdoors. But it's a very weird and strange, disconnected world. It's interesting that in the concept of the series, language has changed and it's become much more stilted. People speak in short bursts. They don't create fully formed sentences. They speak a sort of shorthand, an English shorthand. And life is very antiseptic. People are matched with partners by a computer. They watch hologram entertainment, which is where the Beatles connection comes in. One particular night, Dominick is talking to his aunt, who's 150, and Dominick's talking to his aunt and his mother, who incidentally is played by Jean Trend, who appeared in the second series of Do Much. You may recall I mentioned her in my Do Much video a little while ago. And he's talking about the past, and she mentions that there was a piece of film that she can't locate which shows Dominick's great-great-grandfather in the 20th century with his mother on a beach somewhere. She can't find this footage, she can't unearth it, she doesn't know where it is. Dominick becomes inspired and fascinated and obsessed with this idea of his great-great-grandfather who lived in 1980 in London. And he makes the decision to land in 1980, which is specifically forbidden by his boss Caleb Lyne, who's played by the brilliant Patrick McGee. Dominick travels back to 1980 and he lands in 1980 and he starts to investigate 1980. He only has a rough idea about where his great-great-grandfather lived, and that's referred to as Port Beale. He eventually discovers that that's a corruption of Portobello Road in London, and eventually ends up there, and he meets up with a young lady called Jane Winters, played by Caroline Langrish. She runs slightly offbeat fashion business. It's quite ramshackle. Her community is very much based on that sort of almost like EastEnders market traders, people who make a living on the street selling goods, and she's got a little shop and she just sells things. She's just bumbling along. She meets Dominick and she becomes sort of interested in him because he meets up with her and her friends. He tells her that he's looking for his great-great-grandfather, whose name is Dominick Hyde. He creates an alter ego for himself, which is quite an amusing scene. They're sitting in a pub and they ask him what his name is, and he sees a bottle of gin on the behind the bar, Gilby's gin, and he calls himself Gilby, so he becomes known for a while as Gilby Hyde. He sort of nips back and forth to his own time, but he gets more and more attracted, not just to life in 1980, but to Jane. She's fascinated by him, he's attracted to her, and they start a relationship. Science fiction fans will probably know where this is going in terms of him looking for his great-great-grandfather. And yes, it does go there, but it does it very well. And without being exciting, it's just a really intriguing and touching little story as these two people from completely different worlds, quite literally in a sense, completely different time zones, fall in love and have this relationship. Dominick is fascinated by how different life is in 1980. It's not cold and clinical, antiseptic and white and bland. It's free thinking. Jane is a free spirit. She's bohemian. That appeals to him. That attracts him. She's fascinated by him. She's fascinated by the clothes he wears. He wears this wide-brimmed hat, which is in his world, in his time, protection against UV light. It touches upon those sort of environmental issues as well. The fabric of his clothes. She hasn't come across anything like that before. And of course, being into fashion, she's fascinated by that. So their relationship progresses, and she's baffled by the fact that he has to keep disappearing. He has to go back to his own time because he can't really stay there for very long. So he flips in and out of her life, but they do become romantically attached. Eventually, he tells her who he really is and where he's from, and she doesn't believe it. She thinks he's talking nonsense until he ends up proving it to her when his spaceship, which has been berthed at a local funfair, disappears when the funfair moves off to Herne Bay. And he and Jane travel to Herne Bay, find the spaceship, have a day together, and she finally sort of believes his story when she sees him enter the spaceship and travel back to his own time. Meanwhile, in his own time, he's bringing back the exciting ideas and the exciting things he's seen to his world. And whilst he tells his wife in the 22nd century, her name is Eva, she's played by Pippa Guard, he tells her about everything that's going on in 1980. He doesn't hide things from her. He tells her about his affair with Jane. She's not particularly jealous because that sort of thing seems to have been fed out of people in the past because they've been matched by a computer. Issues of jealousy and rage and anger, those sort of things don't really rear their heads. But Dominick realises that he can't stay in 1980, especially when he discovers that him going back into the past has actually been engineered by Caleb Line, who wants him to go back because there's been a slight disruption in the timeline. He has to go back to make the future happen to an extent. It's a lovely, charming play, and I've used that word a couple of times. That was the best way to describe it. It does that fantastic thing that good time travel stories do. It's got the fish out of water element. Dominick landing in the 20th century. He comes across pubs. He doesn't understand about money. He doesn't understand about electricity. He doesn't understand any of these basic things. And Peter Firth plays it so well, completely sort of straight and deadpan, but with lovely little bits of humour thrown in here and there, which apparently a lot of those things came from him, his input into the script and into the production. As I said, it's not a big action thing. There's no thrills and spills. It's just a really pleasant, slow-paced story. I think modern audiences may find it a bit slow-paced, but I remember seeing it at the time, and I'm pretty sure I saw it when it was on, and just became mesmerised by it, because of course I love all this sort of stuff anyway. Science fiction, time travel is an element of science fiction I do find particularly interesting. But this really plays on that sort of the romantic aspect of it and the sort of the loop of time that reveals itself without giving too much of a spoiler. But as I said, you probably from my description, you will be able to work out where it all joins up. The spaceship design is terrific as well. I mean, it is a flying saucer, and it as I said, it marries up with Alan Gibson's concept of flying saucers as things from the past, because this is very much a saucer. I really like this film because it's feel good. It is a genuinely feel good piece of television. It's not dark and threatening. It suggests that something terrible has happened to the world in the late 20th century, which of course didn't happen. But it doesn't linger on that because humanity has prevailed. As he explains in one particular part of the script, certain parts of the world were lost, but humanity has survived and has great technological advances. The performances are terrific. I mean, Peter Firth is a great actor. Many of you may remember him from Spooks. He had a long-running role throughout the entire series as Harry Pierce, the boss of MI6. Even older viewers will remember him in the children's musical adventure series Here Come the Double Deckers from 1971. And I may well be doing a video on that before long. Caroline Langrish is superb as Jane. She has a vivacity about her, even though she's sort of slightly shambolic and disorganised and lives life one day at a time. That's very appealing. and she plays it really well, and the chemistry with her and Peter Firth is just on point throughout. But the film works because it's just warm-hearted. Time travel very often deals with repercussions of going back and upsetting things and how things can change. But this is just a really nice story about a man out of time coming to terms with the past and realising that although it's a more primitive time compared to the time he comes from, there are lessons to be learned from the past. And that's perhaps something that we should remember as we rush pell-mell into a hellscape of AI in years to come. I can't recommend this enough. It's just a lovely, warm feeling I get when I watched it. And I watched it again recently. It's on YouTube. It isn't a great quality picture on YouTube, but if you're interested in it, it is available on DVD. You can still pick up the DVD for about £6-7 on Amazon, which has got this film. And there was a sequel 2 years later called Another Flip for Dominick. I haven't dealt with that here. I may well do a separate video on that. It's interesting because the original Flipside is a fully rounded story. It has its beginning and middle, and it's circular. Didn't really need a sequel, but it was so popular when it was screened in December 1980. I think it had over 5 million viewers, and it had the best response that any Play for Today of that particular series had had. So it was inevitable that BBC might be interested in another one, and Alan Gibson and Jeremy Paul came up with an idea which isn't as strong because there is a bit more of a thriller element to that. There's a bit more adventure to it, but it does go back to the relationship between Jane and Dominick, and Jane's circumstances have changed in the 2 years since Dominick was last there. Also well worth seeing. I dare say that's also on YouTube. But seriously, if you like clever, witty, romantic fiction with a warm heart and good intentions, I think you'll have a good time with Dominick Hyde. It's one of those shows, one of those productions that I think has probably been forgotten because it's of its time in so many ways. Hasn't been repeated. I think it may have been on BBC 4 at some point. But I just remember thinking it was wonderful at the time because of the clever and interesting things it did with time travel, and I think you will really enjoy it. So that's the flip side of Dominick Hyde, which, as I said, is available on YouTube, and still pick it up on DVD. It looks better. Right, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this little flip back to the flip side. Please like and subscribe. As I said, leave a comment down below. Nice to get the subscriber numbers up. I just got this dream of getting to 2,000 subscribers. So like and subscribe. If you do remember Dominick Hyde, if you saw Dominick Hyde back in the day, or you've caught up with it since, please let me know. I'd love to hear your memories of this show. And it's always nice when I do something about something which seems fairly obscure and people remember it, or their memories are jogged by me talking about it. That's really nice to think that you're able to bring something forward from the back of people's minds. I'm really pleased that I'm sometimes able to do that. And I think Dominick Hyde, although it was shown scarily 44 years ago, it may be one of those things that people have totally forgotten. And I'm hoping that I've brought back some memories for you today. So if you do remember it, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Right, thank you for watching. I think I'm out of here now. Yes, I am. More stuff to come soon. It's been quite a busy all week with some retro stuff. And as I said, it's generated some new subscribers and comments. So keep them coming. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.